And welcome to my video on cross elasticity of demand. Here are the IB learning objectives for you. You're to once again define and be able to illustrate this, be able to calculate cross elasticity of demand from a set of data. You're going to show why there are values the way they are. The elastic and inelastic situation again will also describe whether there's a close relationship or a unclose relationship, a remote relationship, and we're two types of elasticity of XED are substitutes and complements, and explain how this is going to actually provide very useful knowledge for businesses. Let's take a look. XED measures elasticity between two goods. And once again, it is the proportional change in the quantity of one good as it responds to a change in the price of another good. Clearly, these two goods need to have a relationship between them, and the two types of relationships are substitutes and complements. So that's why the XED is X, comma Y. There's two products involved, and you'll see why the negative coefficients will be complements and the positive substitutes. And when there's a close relationship, the quantity will be changing a lot more than if it's not close at all. And indeed, zero means there's no relationship between the two products. And there's the formula there, very much structured in the same way. There's a quantity change divided by the original point, which gives us the proportional change in the quantity, and then in the numerator the proportional change in the price. So same formula there to give you the structure of calculating elasticity. Let's see how it works. In the case of a complement, here we see on the y-axis the price of one product. And that is causing a change in the quantity of X. So let's say that we're at price number 1 and we get a certain quantity for X. And that could be drawn on its own demands curve, but this is not a demand curve. This is just a curve that shows the relationship of quantity and price points between the two products. If the price of Y drops in, some product of Y is dropping in price, what's happening in this second quantity point here is that the product X increases a little bit. Now what's happening with Y? With Y, the price is going down from P1 to P2. For the quantity of Y, if it were just simply a PED function, then clearly we would see the quantity increase for Y as well, wouldn't we? So therefore, if the quantity is increasing for X, then that means X and Y are bought together, and that's what complements are. So if we are having staplers go down in price from price 1 to price 2, there'll be more staplers bought, higher quantity of staplers. And now replacement staples will experience a greater quantity, even though, and that's the quantity of X, even though the price has not changed for staples, but the replacements will change in quantity and increase. So they go together in the way that the quantities are changing, but because the price and quantity are an inverse relationship for demand, so it is the price and quantity of a complement good is also a negative relationship. And in the case of another type of good, which is also a complement, we see the price going down from P1 to P2, but in this case there's a huge change in the quantity, and that means complement B is a close relationship. And you would think, in fact, perhaps my example of staples and staplers might be pertinent here. Certainly one thinks of printers and printer ink, so that if the price of printers go down, and quite often that's been happening over the past 10 or 15 years, price of printers, which is the product Y, is going down from P1 to P2, and complement B is the printer ink. Those prices are still pretty high, but there's a huge demand for them because people are buying so many printers that require ink replacements, and so complement B has a huge increase in quantity because there's such a huge increase for the printers themselves. So that's how to explain what a close relationship is. It's more price XED elastic, and the not close but still complement is an inelastic, and both are downward sloping curves to show the relationship for complements. So there is a reminder. It's an inverse relationship, and there's a negative coefficient, and we see that the inelastic curve for product A means it's not a close or a remote pair of products, and the relationship for complement B and the original product of Y is close because there's an elastic XED relationship. Now, in the case of substitutes, it's a similar idea. It does get a bit tricky because you have to imagine, again, these are not demand curves. They are showing a relationship between two different products. One has the price change and the other is the quantity change. Quantity of X is going to be shown by two types of substitutes. In this case, substitute A. And if we consider, first of all, the price of Y, so that's some product, and all we know is the price has increased for Y. Okay, that's great. Goes from P1 over to P2. Notice then, before we even talk about that, if the price of Y increases, we know according to the law of demand, the quantity of Y will decrease. In this case, we see the quantity of the substitute, quantity of X, substitute A, is increasing. So that makes sense because consumers will buy less of quantity Y, that's why the quantity goes down, and substitute for quantity of substitute X, so that quantity will increase. If it only increases a little bit, shows that yes, it's a substitute, but it's actually a remote substitute. It's not all that much of an influence. The alternative is another substitute, which if you start again at price P1 and Y increases to price P2, the substitute B now has a huge increase in quantity. And therefore that shows there's a close relationship. So it might be between two different types of chairs, let's say, or it might be between two different types of herbal teas or two different coffee shops, that sort of thing. The price of the one coffee shop that increases a little bit, and you might get a big change in the other coffee shop. There'd be a huge increase if the price of the first one were to increase in its price. So that's how you can tell why there is going to be a positive relationship in the case of substitutes, because the consumers are switching in response to the increase or change in price of one to the quantity of the other. And the coefficient will also be positive. If there's not much of a change in quantity, then it's going to be a remote type of substitute relationship, and shown by that typically steep type of curve, inelastic XED, and the elastic XED is shown by a relatively flat diagram here, and that shows that there's going to be a huge response in the change in quantity. So that's basically the overview of how it all works. And to practice, you would draw a scale, just a simple two-dimensional horizontal scale, showing in this order. On the very left you'd have the close substitutes. In the middle there's no relationship between two products with a zero coefficient, and positive 2. Of course they go to higher values than 2, but this just makes it nice and simple for you to show that certainly when you're getting above 1, you're heading into the close relationship range, and complements would be on the right-hand side. And come up with examples on your own. And you might just come up with your own justification. It's okay, because it's not as though there's a predetermined and obvious coefficient. It really depends on hard data, which you don't have to have for yourself unless it's given for you in a paper 3 question. But in paper 1, you just come up with your own examples, justify whether or not a desk chair and desks will be complements and close or not, and would 2 different types of lounge furniture be complements, 2 different types of tea may be close, but maybe tea and coffee are not close substitutes, and all that sort of thing. And you just draw your relationships that way, as shown, and you can also, of course, put in your explanation to match the diagram. Now, of course, a lot of textbooks will show the 2 products in 2 separate diagrams, and you feel free to do that too. My diagrams just show them as one, which is just absolutely fine. Makes it a little bit easier to draw if you can see how that works for you. And now question number 3 is a very good one in terms of really an evaluation skill. If you are a firm of one product and you know that there's another firm nearby and it's either a complement or a substitute product, and if they change their price, you know that there's going to be a change in your business. Your quantity will change, and when you know that that price is changing for the other firm, then you can begin to plan what changes you'll need to do for your firm in order to anticipate correctly the change in quantity that you're going to experience from your consumers. All right, I hope you've enjoyed that video. Thank you for listening.